My name is Amy Cross, and I am 37 years old. I'm living a fulfilling life as a designer. Next year, I'm scheduled to marry the love of my life, and I'm on cloud 9. However, 4 years ago, I went through a divorce. My ex-husband, Daniel Stevens, was a year older than me and a pilot for a certain airline. He mainly handling international flights at that time. 6 months into our relationship, Daniel proposed to me on my birthday. Amy, I promise to make you happy. The only woman for me, now and forever, is you. Will you marry me? Daniel? Are you serious? This isn't a joke, right? It's no joke. I'm serious. I love you. A proposal after just 6 months of dating. It would normally require some time to respond. I was definitely taken aback by the suddenness, but at that time, I couldn't see a future that wasn't bright and filled with love with Daniel. I didn't need any time to think it over. Yes. I'd be glad to. Still excited from the proposal on our way home, Daniel added. Let's go to the city hall tomorrow. It would be terrible if you changed your mind. I want to be with you as soon as possible. I won't change my mind. You never know. I can't live without you, Amy. Daniel has always been assertive. He was the one who relentlessly pursued me, even when I was hesitant about love. It was a night full of surprises, but I was completely drawn into Daniel's pace, and we actually ended up submitting our marriage application the very next day. I called my parents to let them know, but they were somewhat worried about us getting married after only 6 months. Only 6 months of dating? Aren't you just getting carried away? Do you really know him well enough? Dad, it's okay. Daniel is a solid guy. Trust your daughter and don't worry. All right. I understand. I just want you to be happy. Thank you, Dad. It wasn't just the excitement of love that influenced my decision back then. Daniel had once shared his upbringing with me. I made it here on my own. There was no money for flight school, let alone connections. I gave up hanging out with friends and studied relentlessly to join an airline. After joining, I continued to work hard to always be at the top of my class. Daniel had lost his parents when he was young. Raised by his grandparents, his family wasn't wealthy. I admired him for his relentless pursuit of his dreams. However, looking back, I think things might have happened in the wrong order. The day we filed our marriage application, I canceled my apartment lease and moved into Daniel's apartment. Our new life starts now, he said joyfully, and I blushed with a shy smile. Let's always keep our home cheerful. Let's have a lavish wedding. I can't wait to see you in your wedding dress. We're really married, huh? Everything moved so quickly that sometimes I couldn't quite believe we were married. It took about a month to pick the venue, but we finally found the perfect place and were about to start planning the wedding in detail. Daniel's attitude changed drastically after we visited my parents' house to formally introduce him. Things shifted significantly. We really should visit your parents properly. I was too excited back then and was rude to them. Yes, that's true. They were worried about us getting married after just 6 months, so we need to reassure them soon by introducing them to Daniel. And so, we planned to visit my parents that weekend. On the day we visited, Daniel seemed unusually nervous, so much so that he even buttoned his suit incorrectly. By the way, my parents' house is located in Nebraska. When we finally arrived, it was already late afternoon. I was thrilled to be back at my childhood home, but the moment Daniel saw it, he hesitated and asked, "Wait, this is Amy's place?" Yes, what's wrong? I couldn't understand why he was acting so oddly. Just wondering. My parents had prepared delicious fish and local dishes, and I felt a nostalgic delight as I enjoyed the Midwestern cuisine. However, Daniel's behavior was a bit off. He was unusually quiet due to his nervousness, and he occasionally made slightly scornful remarks like, "It's quite plain here, isn't it?" Back at the hotel, he remained in a bad mood, and when I asked what was wrong, he only said, "It's nothing." I was puzzled by this side of Daniel I hadn't seen before but hoped he would get over it with time. However, his sullenness persisted even when we returned to New York. "I'm really busy with work, Amy." "You are too, right? About the wedding, should we just cancel it?" "What? Are you serious?" "Yeah. I mean, I'm barely home, how can we prepare?" "I can handle the preparations. But honestly, I don't want to spend so much money on something that only lasts a couple of hours." Truth be told, I've lost interest in having the wedding, he said, and we ended up canceling the ceremony. Daniel, originally an international pilot, was often away from home, but after that, he seldom returned. When he did, he was indifferent, almost ignoring my existence. It felt like I was invisible. Soon, I discovered I was pregnant. Unsure of how to tell him or how he would react, I was terrified. But I thought this might be a chance to reconnect with Daniel. So, I told him over the phone. He was silent for a while. "Hey, we're having a baby. Don't you have anything to say?" "Huh? Oh, nothing." I felt heartbroken. "You seem not so happy about it." Shut up, I'm busy now. I'm hanging up." As I listened to the dial tone, I was dumbfounded. Dealing with morning sickness and Daniel's indifference was overwhelming, and I felt crushed by the uncertainty of our future. I confided in my parents and 2 close friends, but kept it from my coworkers. Overwhelmed by the pain, I couldn't eat and threw myself into work to hide my loneliness. As a result, I miscarried after less than 2 months due to severe bleeding. I emailed Daniel about it, but he never replied. A year after these continuous misunderstandings, I began to consider divorce as an option. However, it seemed I wasn't the only one. One day, Daniel left the house without saying anything. He left only a signed divorce paper on the table. I couldn't think of any reason for his behavior. Except for that day we visited my parents' home. "Oh. This is Amy's family home? Huh, interesting," he had said with a hint of disdain. He looked around the house as if he had seen something repulsive. Though I had been contemplating divorce myself, due to the dysfunction in our marriage. It wasn't that I had given up on having a happy marriage. When I saw the divorce papers, I collapsed in shock. Wiping away tears, I desperately called Daniel, hoping for at least an explanation. "What's up?" Daniel's voice sounded through the phone. It was as indifferent as ever. His cold, prickly tone pierced my heart. Gathering my courage, I asked him why. "Daniel, why?" "Why? You know why. The love has faded." "I want to know why the love faded, not why you want a divorce. You weren't the woman I thought you were." "But, Daniel, you changed after seeing my parents' house, didn't you? We were having fun talking on the train ride there, but as soon as we got to the house, you changed." "Why?" "If you really want to know, I'll tell you." He burst out after I pointed out the sudden change in his behavior since that day. "The woman I'm with has to be perfect. I've climbed to where I am today solely through my own efforts. Do you understand? I am perfect now. The woman I marry must match that. A wife from a house as shabby as yours lowers my value. It's too embarrassing to tell anyone. I can't be associated with a dirty and poor family background. You get it. So, that's why you wanted to cancel the wedding? Because you were embarrassed by my parents?" I was more shocked than angry, and I couldn't find any more words to say. "Whatever, I've moved another woman into the apartment. You need to be out by the end of the month." He hung up abruptly after finishing his one-sided conversation. As expected, I was overwhelmed by tears. The pain of our love truly ending and being spoken to so cruelly was too much. Unable to accept the reality, I cried until my pillow was soaked. At that moment, I thought I would never recover. 2 months later, I had pushed my feelings for Daniel deep into the back of my mental closet and was on my way to Australia to attend my cousin's wedding. Since it was an international flight, there was a chance I could run into Daniel at the airport. Part of me wanted to see him again, a fearless curiosity, while another part never wanted to see him again, a strange mix of feelings. But fate seems to enjoy playing tricks. As I was heading to the lounge in the airport, which was also our family meeting spot, I heard a familiar voice from behind. Turning around, I saw Daniel. As our eyes met, I tried to rush into the lounge to escape. But it was too late. He caught up and grabbed my hand. "What are you doing here?" "It's none of your business," I snapped as I shook off his hand. Ouch. "But do you even know what this place is?" "You tried to run, but this lounge is for first-class passengers only." "I know that. I'm meeting my family here." "You're kidding, right?" "You heard me. It's for first-class passengers only. Do you even know what first class is?" "Don't talk down to me. Of course, I know what first class is." "So, you'd have to pay a high fare to get in here. There's no way your poor family could afford it." Enraged, I retorted. "That's none of your business. And stop calling my family poor. What are you even talking about?" Regardless, I couldn't stand the flight attendant constantly by Daniel's side. She's giggling inappropriately. There's a limit to how rude one can be. At least I was a customer here. I glanced at her. Noticing my gaze, Daniel said, "Oh, her? She's my wife." I couldn't believe my ears. It had only been 2 months since our divorce. "We've only been divorced for 2 months, haven't we?" "So what? You planning to make a scene about an affair to squeeze alimony out of me?" "Too bad. Samantha here is also a flight attendant on international routes. We've known each other for a long time." "That's pathetic. So it was all like that. I'm truly appalled." Can people really change this much? Or was Daniel always this person, and I was just too blind in love to see it? He started rambling on without me asking. "Her father is a county legislator, and when I went to greet her parents, their house was a mansion, completely different from your parents' place, right?" "Yeah, sure." It became clear that status was all that mattered to Daniel. I was so disgusted that I was speechless. To think that I had ever been in love with such a man was embarrassing. But what about this Samantha? Doesn't she care at all about what Daniel says? "Hey, is this woman Daniel's ex-wife?" "Daniel, I didn't know you liked women with short hair too." What was she even talking about? Despite Daniel's emphasis on the importance of a partner's parental status, she seemed only concerned about my hair length. It was disrespectful, and I was surprised she could even become a flight attendant. This woman comes from a poor and dirty household, right? And she even has dandruff? Gross. What had Daniel told this woman about me? Dandruff? That's an exaggeration. What kind of woman has Daniel made me out to be? And then Samantha. I must emphasize, I am a customer here. There really is a limit to foolishness. For the record, I'm not poor, and I bathe daily. Oh really? I thought you didn't. And what if I were poor? Is status more important to you than love? You didn't know anything about my family's home initially. Exactly. I made a mistake. Amy's a designer and has style, so I never imagined her family home was that poor. Was he complimenting or insulting me? I'm just appalled. These two were clearly in their own world. Joining their conversation felt ridiculous. Just then, Daniel suddenly took off his hat and bowed deeply. Samantha did the same. Wondering what was happening, I heard a voice from behind Amy. I turned to see my grandfather. My family was gathering in the lounge to wait for our flight to my cousin's wedding. Oh, Grandpa. Grandpa? Any trouble, Amy? No, nothing. These people are just acquaintances. Go ahead inside, Grandpa. All right, I'll go in first. I ushered my grandfather into the lounge. Is that man your grandfather? No way. Yes, but what about it? That suit, it's a high-end Italian brand, Probably worth around $60,000. Oh, really? I don't know much about men's brands. Was your grandfather rich? What does he do? He's the chairman of a major corporation. And just so you know, although my parents' house might look shabby, they're both practicing doctors. My father is a professor of surgery at a national hospital, and my mother runs a medical clinic. That poor and dirty house that Daniel slandered is just their way of reminding themselves not to let status or power define them. But, seeing your reaction, it seems I did the right thing in bringing you to the family home. Amy, I'm sorry. I didn't know, and I said terrible things. Samantha, let's get divorced. Amy, marry me again. I promise I'll make you happy this time. Wow, Daniel, that's terrible. Were you always this fickle? It was the second time I had heard such a drastic change of attitude. The first time was when he left without a word after a year of ignoring me. As soon as he realized my family was wealthy, he completely flipped his stance. It was ridiculous, and in that moment, any lingering feelings I had for Daniel vanished. He was essentially a stranger to the man I once knew. I'm sorry, Amy. I was out of line back then. It was me who was out of line. Is this the real Daniel? It was only because I thought your family was poor that I said those terrible things. So, you change your behavior based on whether someone is poor? You enjoy looking down on people? Weren't you poor once too? I blurted out in anger, immediately regretting my harsh words. Sorry, Daniel. I didn't mean to. Yeah, my family was poor, so what? You were too, weren't you? Daniel's tone suddenly softened, yet his voice carried a hint of sadness. As we continued this absurd exchange, my parents arrived at the lounge. Upon seeing Daniel, they were shocked, and my father exploded in anger. Are you the one who hurt my precious daughter? My mother had to restrain him as he looked ready to throw a punch. It's your fault Amy had a miscarriage. And to think you ignored her for a year just because she was poor, and then called her poor and dirty. You're rotten, aren't you ashamed as a man? No, I mean... No. The one who was rotten was me. It was embarrassing to admit I had fallen in love with someone like Daniel, who was now practically a stranger. Just then, my grandfather, who had been informed by my parents that they had arrived, stepped outside the lounge to greet them. What's all this commotion about? Grandpa! What are you shouting for? Did this pilot do something? Dad, it's not just something, this man is Amy's ex-husband. Daniel must have felt terrified as my father's words echoed. Frozen solid. Ex-husband? The one who was our pilot. Yes. Yes, this JPA Airlines. This JPA Airlines what? Chairman. Chairman? Daniel was visibly shaken. What? Amy, why didn't you tell me? Oh, right, you hadn't mentioned it, Amy? I didn't want to bother you, Grandpa. And it felt wrong to talk behind someone's back. Wait, why did you invite us to such a shabby, sorry, the family home? Yes, the family home. It might not look impressive, but it's comfortable for Mom and Dad. They keep it that way for a reason. There's another house in the city, but I invited you to the family home on purpose then. What? Why did you keep quiet about this? What, would it have changed anything if you knew? Are you only interested in my family background? Clearly, you weren't really looking at me. I'd rather not be involved with someone like that. Ugh. In truth, my grandfather and I were very close. He knew about my divorce. And he had been supportive during that time. I never wanted revenge. Back then, I had kept it a secret from my grandfather that Daniel was a pilot at the same airline. I thought that revealing this might be too burdensome for Daniel. But now, the moment had come. My grandfather, thinking Samantha was just a flight attendant, dismissed her, saying, "This is a family matter, so you should leave." Yes. Excuse me. Samantha hurried away, unable to hide her surprise. I was so appalled that I no longer felt any desire to defend Daniel, and I honestly told my grandfather that Samantha was Daniel's new wife.
Hey, you! You just got divorced, and you've already remarried another woman? What were you thinking? Hurting my granddaughter and then rushing into another marriage?
My grandfather was as furious as my father.
Were you having an affair while you were married to Amy? No, that's not it. There was this junior flight attendant, and after my divorce, I was so shocked that I consulted with her. Before I knew it, she became a significant presence in my life.
Lies.
How can you lie so blatantly? I can't believe this.
I relayed this entire conversation to my parents and grandfather. He clenched his jaws. I found his anger reaching a peak. But he seemed at a loss for words due to the childish nature of the discussion.
If I weren't your boss, I would have hit you right here and now.
Grandpa, it's okay. It seems I was looking at a different Daniel. I've completely moved on. It was the first time I had seen my grandfather so angry. He told Daniel and his group, "We will discuss this as a family and ensure you compensate appropriately for the hurt you caused Amy. Remember this." Later, my grandfather contacted me.
"Amy, are you okay? Has he contacted you since?"
"Just some excuses and emails, but I've ignored them all."
"I see. I wish we could teach him a lesson."
Although my grandfather was still upset, I had completely moved on. Usually measured and never one to put others down, he must really love his granddaughter to be this agitated. He was keen on making Daniel pay. My grandfather was so protective of me that he seemed ready to resign from his position as chairman if necessary. I urged him to stay calm, but deep down, I felt frustrated thinking that Daniel might be continuing his life as if nothing had happened.
"If that's the case, Grandpa, I don't know if it will work, but I'll hire a lawyer."
From the options my grandfather suggested, I chose to claim alimony from Daniel as it would cause the least trouble for my grandfather. However, there was no solid evidence of Daniel's infidelity. During our phone conversation before he submitted the divorce papers, I knew about the new woman but had no recorded proof. At the same time, it seems my grandfather was quite curious and inquired about Daniel and Samantha's relationship from other cabin attendants and pilots in the International Flights Department where Daniel worked. However, as my grandfather inquired around Daniel's workplace, a colleague pilot let slip. "He's really into women, you know. Not just the flight attendants, but he was even asking for phone numbers from female passengers." A single comment led to an internal issue at the company. This triggered a major internal investigation. It's unclear whether the colleague pilot who mentioned Daniel's behavior did so accidentally or deliberately exposed him. However, according to my grandfather's follow-up, Daniel's arrogant attitude of "I am an international pilot" was not well liked among his male colleagues and the cabin crew. Daniel also reportedly underwent several investigative interviews. Daniel, confronted with no way out, admitted to misconduct with passengers. And he claimed he approached Samantha because he felt stuck in his poor status after marrying me, thinking marrying the daughter of a councilman would elevate his status. The investigation, along with his statements, helped secure testimonies about his affair with Samantha during our marriage. I successfully claimed $60,000 in alimony. Though I didn't need the money, the lawyer said financial compensation was the only recourse. And Daniel, due to his misconduct not only with colleagues but also with passengers, was not fired but was removed from his position as a pilot for violating company policies and disrupting the corporate culture. He transferred to a department with no contact with passengers or flight attendants. After losing his pilot position, Samantha left him and divorced again. In the end, Samantha probably married Daniel for his status as well. In a way, they were a couple well matched in their priorities. Later, I caught up with a good friend. Daniel also came up in the conversation.
"Amy, that must have been tough. Are you okay?"
"Yeah, I'm totally fine."
"That's good. Daniel seemed like a completely different person before and after being with you.
I wonder which was the real him."
"I've thought about that too. Though I've moved on, it nagged at me. He looked so sad when I said those harsh things in anger, and my grandfather mentioned how Daniel felt trapped by his poor status. People change with money, don't they? Maybe, but who cares? Cheers!
Daniel, who had dreamed of being a respected pilot. Daniel worked tirelessly and achieved his position through sheer dedication, but once he reached his goals, he became arrogant. People often forget humility when praised and flattered. Just like my parents' home served as a reminder not to let status or power dominate oneself, perhaps Daniel needed a similar lesson. Unfortunately, his ambitions turned to naught, and now he reportedly lives alone in a small apartment, having his dinners with instant noodles. Now, I'm planning my second marriage next year. I met him on a flight to Australia while attending my cousin's wedding. He was traveling to Australia too, and we hit it off right away. After 4 years of dating, we're getting married. His family and mine are supportive, and we even took a trip to Alaska together. Next May, our family is set to grow by one more. Yes, I'm currently pregnant with a new life. The pregnancy is going well, and I've just reached the 26th week. At the last checkup, we found out it's going to be a boy, and both families, perhaps a bit prematurely, are already shopping for baby boy clothes and shoes. My partner suggested naming him after my grandfather, who passed away now.
Grandpa, I'm doing well.
My wife will be gone by tomorrow. During our honeymoon, I woke up in the middle of the night to overhear my husband secretly having a terrifying conversation on the phone. Trembling with fear, I dared to peek into his smartphone to find out what he was talking about. What I found was beyond belief. Knowing of my husband's plan, I took his passport and flew back to the States on my own. As I was planning to utterly destroy him, someone suddenly approached me. My name is Karen. I'm just an ordinary office worker in New York. I met my husband, Brian, through mutual friends. We hit it off after a few dinners out, and after dating for a year, we just recently got married. Brian is handsome and has a really kind personality, but there was one major problem. This happened one day just before our wedding.
I'm home.
Normally, Brian gets home from work later than I do, but on this day, I had to work late, so I got home after him. As I walked in and was about to take off my shoes, I noticed something odd. Were these shoes always here? There were not only Brian's work shoes, but also a pair of women's heels. Could he be cheating? I thought. Listening carefully, I could hear muffled voices. It was a man and a woman talking, and I immediately recognized Brian's voice. I couldn't make out the entire conversation, but I could hear a woman's voice laughing along. In the spur of the moment, I started recording with my smartphone and burst into the living room.
Huh?
There was Brian and my mother-in-law.
Oh, welcome back. Karen, welcome home. Sorry for intruding.
Relieved that it wasn't an affair, the living room scene was still quite bizarre. Boxes were piled up everywhere. Confused, I asked, "What's with all these boxes?" Brian responded, "Oh, these? We're moving." My mom came over to help pack. I was so confused I felt like my brain might explode.
Moving? Where to? I never heard about this. Oh, Brian. You didn't tell Karen? Sorry, I've been so busy with work. I'm so sorry, Karen. I told him if you're gonna get married, you should move into our house. It looks like Brian didn't mention it to you.
Live in her house? I was more confused than ever. I was looking forward to starting our newlywed life together, just the two of us. This is a huge deal. I have to put a stop to this. So, I said, I haven't been told anything about this. I can't just agree to something decided without me. But then they said, it's normal for newlyweds to live with their in-laws, you know? If you can't, maybe you should reconsider the marriage. Mom's right. Plus, I'm used to my house. It'll be easier for you too if anything happens. 2 birds with 1 stone, right? With my mother-in-law present, I couldn't argue with Brian, and it was decided that we'd move into his parents' home. Turns out, Brian is very much a mama's boy. In retrospect, had I been more assertive back then, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. Living with my in-laws was incredibly tough for me. Ever since we started living at my husband's parents' house, his mama's boy tendencies accelerated. The first person he'd ask for anything was always Mom. While my mother-in-law took care of most of the cooking and household chores, the rare times I made dinner he would say, "My mom's cooking tastes better." Perhaps my mother-in-law enjoyed being relied on by her son because she did everything for him. My father-in-law would just turn a blind eye to this behavior and not only ignored me but wouldn't even look at me. Sometimes, when I tried talking to him, he'd just brush me off. I constantly questioned my place in the household. The biggest concern for me was my mother-in-law's extravagant spending habits. After moving in, I realized she adored branded clothes and bags. Every time her favorite brands released something new, she'd buy it. Every release, she'd approach me saying, "Karen, I really want this, but I'm a bit short on cash right now. Could you maybe lend me a little?" Even though I thought she shouldn't buy it if she couldn't afford it, since she did all the cooking and cleaning, I couldn't object and just gave her the money as asked. Thanks to this, the savings I had accumulated since my college days were nearly gone. When I tried discussing this with my husband, he just said, "We're living here rent-free, so don't complain. It's not like I chose to live here." Still, the reason I didn't leave was that my husband, for all his faults, genuinely cared for me. Whenever we both had a day off, he'd take me out on dates and he had even planned our honeymoon. Living with the in-laws was tough, but I kept going, holding on to the hope in his kindness. Finally, the day of our honeymoon that my husband planned arrived. Our destination was Italy. It was a dream come true for me as I always wanted to try authentic Italian cuisine. The thought of traveling abroad with the love of my life made me so excited. However, my excitement for the honeymoon turned into a nightmare due to one thing my husband said. It happened late at night. I woke up wanting to go to the bathroom and noticed my husband wasn't next to me. Assuming he was also in the restroom, I approached and heard him speaking on the phone. Who could he be talking to at this hour? Listening closer, I heard some shocking words.
"My wife's gonna be gone tomorrow."
What?
"Don't worry, Mom. I've got it all planned. I'll get back to you."
It seemed he was talking to my mother-in-law. But what did he mean by "gonna be gone"? Fearful, I quickly returned to bed and pretended to be asleep. After a while, my husband came back to bed and soon began snoring. Making sure he was asleep, I stealthily took his smartphone and headed to the bathroom. Luckily, he didn't have a password on it. As wrong as it felt, given the circumstances, I had to look. Opening his messages, I found a terrifying plan detailed in the chats with his mother. They were scheming to take my life for the insurance money, which my mother-in-law intended to spend on branded items. The fear was overwhelming. I couldn't believe that my husband, who had always been kind to me, was plotting this with his mother. I took photos of their conversation with my own phone and returned to bed. The rest of the night, I was too frightened to sleep. As dawn broke and transport services started operating, I realized I needed to leave for my safety. Gathering only my belongings, I decided to leave the hotel on my own. Just as I was about to leave, I spotted my husband's passport on the desk. A good idea just hit me. I took my husband Brian's passport and left the room, in an attempt to strand him abroad. I then headed to the airport, boarded the plane, and returned to New York ahead of him. Throughout that time, Brian kept calling me relentlessly, but I ignored all his calls. Once back in New York, I began preparing to take revenge on my husband and his mother. Since I was living with his parents, I couldn't return home. So, I based myself in a relatively cheap hotel in the city, gathering more evidence and contacting lawyers. I also made occasional visits to our house when his parents were out, sneaking out some of my belongings bit by bit. Brian continued to reach out, but I kept ignoring him. A few days of such life passed, and I was at his parents' house fetching my belongings. His mother, Karen, was at her knitting class, and his father was out golfing. I figured they wouldn't be back for at least 2 hours. As I was packing, I suddenly heard, "Huh? Karen?" I turned around to find my father-in-law standing there. This wasn't good. Brian and I were supposed to be on our honeymoon in Italy until today.
What are you doing here? Weren't you two supposed to be on your honeymoon?
What should I do? What excuse could I possibly give? Should I be honest about why I returned to New York alone? But what if my father-in-law was in on whatever scheme Brian was planning? These thoughts raced in my mind. Seeing my confusion, he said, "It might be better to talk over a coffee. How about we go to a nearby diner?" Not wanting to be there when my mother-in-law returns, I agreed to his suggestion. Once we sat at the diner, he quickly asked, "So, why are you here when you should be abroad? What happened to Brian?" I was hesitant to tell the truth. If he was in on the plan with her and Brian, everything I had worked on would be ruined. "Didn't your wife tell you anything?" I asked, trying to gauge his knowledge. Looking puzzled, he responded, "I haven't heard a thing." His reaction suggested that he genuinely didn't know anything. Believing him, I decided to lay out everything to him.
"Are you aware of this plan?"
I then showed him the printed messages exchanged between Brian and my mother-in-law. His face was one of sheer shock.
"No way! I've seen them whispering together a few times, but I never thought they were plotting something like this."
It seemed like my father-in-law really didn't know.
"Yes, when I was over there, I overheard my husband talking on the phone with his mom, and that's when I found out. I got scared, so I returned to the US on my own earlier." "I'm so sorry. My wife really owes you an apology." "Please don't apologize. You haven't done anything wrong. As for the future, I feel terrible asking this of you, but I'm thinking of divorcing Brian."
"That's completely up to you, Karen. I'm truly sorry, especially since this should have been a happy time as newlyweds." He apologized to me many times. I used to think he was avoiding me, maybe even disliked me, but he spoke to me with such kindness and concern. Despite him being such a good man, I can't fathom how his wife and my husband turned out the way they did. While I was thinking about this, he shared a story with me. "Karen, you've been forced to buy branded items for my wife, haven't you?"
"Well, yeah, I have."
"You know, it might have been my fault."
"Excuse me?"
"Well, it was shortly after my wife and I got married. I gifted her a designer handbag for her birthday. After that, she became totally obsessed with designer brands. Even at this age, she keeps wearing those expensive brands. I kinda wish she'd dress more age-appropriately."
"I see."
"There were times when she'd even go into debt just to buy them. I was pretty mad at her then. I never imagined she'd ask you to buy stuff for her now. I'm really sorry about that." I had no idea that my mother-in-law's obsession with brands had such a backstory. Still, I couldn't forgive her for what she'd done.
"It's not your fault. She continued her habits even after you got mad at her. She's the one to blame." "Right. By the way, how's Brian doing? He was supposed to be back by now, wasn't he?"
About that. Oh no. I wondered how he'd react knowing that his son was stuck overseas. But I had come this far, I had to tell him everything.
"Actually, I took Brian's passport with me when I came back to the States. So, he won't be coming back for a while."
"What?" "I'm sorry. I know it's wrong, but it was the only way to smoothly proceed with the divorce." "I see. Well, since you live with us, I guess it's understandable." So, that's what was going on.
"Did something happen?" "No, just remembered the day you returned to the US. I overheard Brian talking to my wife on the phone." According to the father-in-law, Brian, for a moment, seemed panicked without me, but he later said that things would work out if I just disappeared. At the time, he had no idea what they were talking about, but now it made sense to him. "I understand the situation. If you're okay with it, I'll support you, Karen." "Really? Thank you so much."
While we were talking, my phone suddenly rang. It was from Brian. Given the time, He probably realized his passport was missing. I finally answered the call.
Hello? Oh, Karen. Thank God you answered. Where the heck are you? I've been worried sick. But I'm just glad you're safe.
I'm sorry for making you worry. I had an urgent call from my family back home and had to return. Things got so hectic that I couldn't get in touch.
I get it. But hey, have you seen my passport? I was gonna return today, but I can't find it.
About that, I accidentally took your passport with me when I rushed back.
What? So what am I supposed to do?
You should be able to get a replacement passport there. It'll probably be faster than me sending it to you.
A replacement? What about my job? I can't take any more days off.
Don't worry, I'll explain everything to your company. I'll also talk to your parents about it. All right then. I'm sorry. So, that's what's going on. Please be careful when you come back. With that, I hung up the phone. Karen, you sure can spin a tall tale, can't ya? I've always been crafty, that's for sure. Thanks to my father-in-law supporting me, I was able to proceed with the divorce preparations more smoothly. And finally, the day arrived. Brian managed to get his passport reissued and returned to the States. His mom went to the airport to pick him up, so the two of them came back home together.
We're home. Man, what an ordeal. Indeed. All because of Karen.
After hearing from Brian that I'd returned to the States before him, his mother, apparently upset that their plan failed, started making sarcastic comments towards me. I wanted to snap back at her, but I held my tongue. No worries. They're gonna get what's coming to them soon. As soon as Brian and his mother entered the house, my father-in-law, with a stern look, said, "Both of you, come here." He led them to the living room where I was waiting.
Sit down.
Brian and his mother seemed a bit flustered, but they couldn't defy his imposing demeanor, so they sat down obediently.
I apologize for bringing this up as soon as you guys got back, but there's something really important we need to discuss. Important? I'll cut to the chase. Brian, I want a divorce. Divorce? Hold on, Karen. What's this all about? You trap my son in Italy and then demand a divorce when he comes back? There's a limit to being unreasonable. Unreasonable? Aren't you the unreasonable ones here? What do you mean? Oh, so you're playing dumb now? Can you explain this then?
Saying this, I showed them pictures of the messages exchanged between Brian and his mother.
What's this? These can be easily fabricated these days. This isn't valid proof. You're right. This might be weak as evidence. But what about this?
I then presented a voice recorder. Pressing the play button, the recording of a phone conversation between Brian and his mother played. My father-in-law had recorded it for me. Since his wife is hard of hearing, she always turns the speaker volume to the max during calls, making it audible throughout the house. My father-in-law took the opportunity to record them. The conversation revealed that since I had safely returned to the US, their scheme had failed. It also included the disappointed voice of my mother-in-law and my husband discussing their next move.
You can't deny this now, can you? Wait, Karen. Please reconsider the divorce. I only did what my mom told me to. I never wanted any of this. But she kept saying she needed more money to buy her favorite designer items. I just wanted to see her happy. But now, I see the light. I don't want to divorce you. Let's leave right now and live happily. It's not too late, right?
I was utterly dumbfounded by his words. How on earth could he come up with such a delusional fantasy in his head?
You know, I've always thought this, but you really need to stop with the whole mommy thing. It's super creepy. I get that you want to please her, but trying to get rid of your wife and using the insurance money to buy her fancy stuff? No way I'm staying with someone like that. Just the thought gives me a headache.
Brian looked utterly defeated by my words.
In any case, I will definitely be seeking a divorce. Plus, I will also ask for reimbursement for all the designer items you bought with my money. What? But then I won't be able to buy designer items.
Even after all this, she still seems obsessed with designer brands. I'm truly dumbfounded by this mother and son duo.
Enough is enough.
Suddenly, my father-in-law interjected.
All you care about is yourselves. Do you realize how terrified Karen has been because of your actions? Are designer items really worth it to you, even if it means using someone else's money? Do you realize how much trouble you've caused her?
The two of them were taken aback by his outburst. Thanks to him speaking up for me, I felt a bit relieved. But my revenge wasn't over yet.
Wait a sec. When did you find out about this? On the first night of our honeymoon in Italy. I overheard you talking to your mom in the middle of the night. So, that's why you flew back to New York the next morning. You didn't tell my company about this, did you? You're finally catching on? Well, you'll know the answer to that soon enough.
Just as I said that, Brian's phone started ringing at the perfect timing.
It's from the company. You gotta be kidding me.
Hesitantly, Brian answered.
Hello? What? Fired? No, wait. It's all a misunderstanding.
Before he could explain, the call seemed to have been cut off.
Just so you know, I've already provided evidence of this to your company.
Having lost both his wife and job, Brian seemed drained of energy and slumped to the floor.
So, from now on, let's communicate through my lawyer. And stay out of my life, okay?
And just like that, our newlywed life came to an end. The story didn't stop with the divorce. My lawyer, whom I'd been consulting with, told me that even just plotting to kill someone was a crime, so I reported the matter to the police. While they weren't arrested, both of them had to pay a hefty fine. Thanks to having a criminal record, Brian struggled to find a new job, and Karen became the talk of the town. Moreover, to pay for the damages and alimony, almost all of the designer goods Karen had hoarded were sold off. The only thing left was a purse, a birthday gift from her husband. From now on, the household finances will be managed by her husband, and Karen's pocket money would be reduced. Seems like they got a taste of their own medicine. As for me, I'm living alone in a condo in Manhattan. While I did divorce shortly after getting married, I didn't feel lonely at all. Rather, I felt liberated. If possible, I'd never want to live with someone else again. Sure, living alone has its challenges, but not having to constantly be wary of someone else is more than worth it. And no more dealing with Karen's money grubbing. I've started saving bit by bit, hoping that someday, I'd find happiness with someone else. It wasn't a major accident, was it? I'm going on a trip now. So, take care of things there. When I heard my dad was hospitalized, I was taken aback. I had hoped my mother-in-law would come with me. But she left for her trip anyway. A week passed, and my mind was filled with these events, leaving my husband and I bewildered. Then, with no knowledge of what transpired, my mother-in-law came back with great energy. To her I said, "Your husband's funeral is over." She clutched her head, lost and confused by my words. My name is Catherine Turn. I'm turning 30 this year. I live with my husband Bob and my dad. I lost my mom at a young age, so my dad raised me, his only daughter. When getting married, I didn't want to leave my father alone. Bob happily agreed to this sentiment. Thanks to that, he came to live at my family home as a son-in-law. This year marks our 5th wedding anniversary.
Hey Bob, let's go out for drinks this weekend. Found a great place.
Is that so? Well, just don't drink too much, okay? If you get too drunk, it'll be hard for you to get home. Watching them talk and laugh together, there are moments they seem just like a real father and son. While Bob is a bit introverted, he's kind and friendly to everyone. My dad seems to appreciate that, which makes me happy. However, not everyone is happy about their bond. Enter my mother-in-law, Mary Matson. She seemed displeased that her precious son was living at his wife's family home. I can understand her feelings to some extent, but it was Bob's decision. Honestly, I wish she'd accept it. From the start of our marriage, whenever she visited, she never missed a chance to throw shade my way.
Bob has married into your family, but he's still my son in every way that matters.
No matter how many years pass, this line is always her opener. Then she continues with,
"And remember, Catherine, you're not a guest when you're at your husband's family home.
Help out with the chores." Saying this, she'd have me do everything from cleaning to cooking. But honestly, I never felt like I was just a visitor there. I carried out my duties without complaints, which probably annoyed her since she ran out of things to criticize. However, when it came to cooking, I'd always check in on how she preferred things.
"Mary, how's this seasoning for the stew?"
Without a word, she'd start adjusting it. Yet, she never missed an opportunity to critique.
"This is nothing like our family's recipe. How could you make me taste this?"
"Start over," she'd say, clearly displeased, and would then try to discard what I made. I always got angry at this behavior, but I could never speak up. I was afraid that if I did, I wouldn't know what she'd say next. Yet, in moments like these, my father-in-law would intervene.
"Catherine put a lot of effort into that. How would you feel if someone tossed out your hard work?" "Well, it's not seasoned right. And it's too salty. Not good for our health."
No matter how much he defended me, she wouldn't listen. I never intended to make the food overly salty. In fact, I often aimed for a lighter taste, adding more seasoning little by little. But she'd always find something to complain about. Bob sometimes stood up for me, but this only aggravated Mary more.
"You don't need to say that much, Mom. You're going overboard. Mind your own business."
Bob always got silenced like that by his mother. Yet later, he'd apologize, saying,
"Sorry for not speaking up."
I'd always smile and reply to Bob, "It's all right." I always felt that she was just bitter, thinking I stole her son away. So I believed she was just making life hard for me out of spite. Once I started thinking that way, I decided not to let her words get to me. And the fact that Bob and my father-in-law would stand up for me became my encouragement. But even though I tried not to let it affect me, if I kept hearing the same things every time I went to their house, it would still break my spirit. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. Even now, whenever I visit their house, she never fails to make snide comments at me. I've become good at brushing off most of what she says, so now her only remarks are about my cooking. She'd hint with a smile, suggesting she's about to start with her sarcasm.
"How do you even manage to season the food this way? Odd, isn't it? I cook just how you told me to."
I'd retort, matching her tit for tat. After 5 years, I'm not the pushover I used to be. At the start of our marriage, I was more reserved and there were many things I wanted to say but didn't. But now, given my nature, I've been speaking up more. Not that it would make her back down, and her remarks towards me didn't cease. In fact, they became even worse. One day, she surprisingly praised my cooking.
"Oh, it turned out quite decent today. But there's still room for improvement."
I was puzzled by her comment, yet took it as rare praise. That's when Bob intervened.
"Actually, it's always good."
Seeing her reaction to his words, she was visibly upset. And then, as always, the snarky comments began.
"Don't get ahead of yourself just because I complimented you.
I haven't changed anything. I made it how you said. I'm actually grateful for your advice." She gave a grimace and then spoke.
"Oh, scary. Young wives these days talk back a lot."
And with that, she left the room. Lately, I've not only been talking back but also not feeling as affected by her words. But there was one topic that always got to me. The fact that we didn't have kids even after 5 years of marriage. Whenever she ran out of comebacks, she'd always bring that up.
"I've been wanting to see my grandchild, but it seems that's still far off. When will that be?"
I'd be at a loss for words against such comments. Indeed, not having children after 5 years does bring concerns. But I believe the more you rush things, the harder they get. So even though I try not to let it affect me, it still hurts when she brings it up. It was becoming a real source of stress for me. Then one day, she called me out of the blue. "Mary, what's the urgency?" I was puzzled by the sudden call. Then, the mother-in-law responded with a gleeful look on her face.
"Oh, didn't I tell you? I'm going on a trip with my friends. I've been planning this for a while. I'll be back in about a week. Please take care of the house."
I was shocked, as I hadn't heard anything about a trip. But then I realized something and asked, "It looks like you've packed only for yourself. Isn't your husband going?"
"He's staying home. I'm going with my friends. Why would I bring him? So please take care of him."
That's unexpected. Just as I was about to retort, my phone rang. However, I didn't recognize the number, so I initially ignored it, but the calls kept coming. Suspicious, I decided to answer. To my surprise, it was a police officer. "Is this Mrs. Catherine Turn's phone?" "Yes, it is." Wondering why the police were calling, I answered the question. Then I was told a shocking truth. Apparently, my father had been in a serious car accident and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. I was even told he was unconscious. No way, my dad. Overwhelmed by shock, I crouched down right where I was. Before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. Seeing me like that, my mother-in-law spoke up. "What happened all of a sudden?" "My dad's been in a car accident and was taken by ambulance." As I responded through my tears, she unexpectedly said, "Oh, that's all?"
"What do you mean, that's all? They said he's unconscious. Can't you come with me? I feel so alone right now."
I begged desperately, but she frowned and replied, "I can't do that. It's probably not a big deal anyway. Besides, I gotta go on a trip now. You handle your stuff on your own. Take care of everything, okay?"
"I can't believe."
I tried to plead again, but she grabbed her bags and left the house. I thought, what if something happens to my dad? What should I do now? Then my father-in-law gently put his hand on my shoulder and quietly said, "Let's go to the hospital first. I'll be there with you." Seeing the kind smile on his face, I felt relieved. So, together with him, I headed to the hospital. Once we arrived and were guided to my father's room, tears once again welled up in my eyes. After a while, Bob also rushed to the hospital. Instead of the distraught me, my father-in-law explained the situation, even mentioning my mother-in-law's trip. "Catherine, don't worry about anything now. Stay by your dad's side. I can manage things at home by myself. Don't stress out." "Thank you so much," I managed to say, overwhelmed with gratitude. And so, I kept a sleepless vigil by my unresponsive father's side. A week went by, and after dinner, Bob and I quietly drank some tea. Our minds were full, trying to process the events of the past few days. Then, unaware of our state, my mother-in-law came home cheerfully.
"I'm back. Sorry for being so late. I planned to be home earlier, but there was a lot of traffic."
She spoke gleefully, but Bob and I remained silent, looking down. Still, she continued.
"The spa trip was so fun. Oh, and I got souvenirs for both of you."
My cheerful mother-in-law didn't notice our mood, and it seemed like she wouldn't stop talking anytime soon.
"Well, I went to the beach, and the ocean looked so beautiful from the room. But the sea itself was also beautiful, it was really nice. We should all go together next time."
However, noticing something was off, she looked around with a puzzled expression. "Speaking of which, where's my husband? The house was locked, so I thought he was here." "Dad's not here. I have the keys." Bob finally responded to the mother-in-law's query, though he looked tense. "Why do you have the house keys, Bob?" the mother-in-law asked, appearing clueless. With a straight face, Bob replied, "It's hard to explain here. Let's go home and talk." Saying this, Bob picked up the car keys and his mother-in-law's luggage and headed to the car. I nodded in agreement with Bob's words, followed him without saying anything else. Unaware of our heavy mood, the mother-in-law was still in high spirits. And perhaps still in a holiday mood, she continued to chat happily in the car.
The food was amazing since we were by the sea. Most of it was seafood, but the sashimi was particularly delicious. There were so many fresh fish, I wanted you guys to see it.
She continued talking non-stop all the way to the house. A trip that took less than 30 minutes by car. But listening to her in silence was tough. But I couldn't stop the mother-in-law who was talking so joyfully. No, that's not it. I just didn't have the energy. Then, equally silent till now, an annoyed Bob finally spoke up.
Mom, can you keep it down a bit?
I'm trying to drive here. Hearing Bob's words, she pouted like a child and began to talk back.
What?
I'm just trying to keep the mood light since you're driving in the dark.
Catherine isn't saying anything either.
What's wrong with enjoying a drive? Hearing her response, I was left speechless out of exasperation. Bob, probably feeling the same way, let out a deep sigh. However, unable to bear it any longer, he shouted.
Mom, just be quiet. I don't want to hear your stories right now.
The mother-in-law looked genuinely shocked at Bob's tone. And then, with a puzzled look on her face, she began to speak.
Why are you so angry? Just trying to concentrate on driving.
Please, just be quiet for now. Perhaps understanding, the mother-in-law finally fell silent. We then spent the rest of the trip in silence. A few minutes later, we finally arrived at the family home. And as Bob unlocked the front door, he entered the house.
I'm home. It feels good to be back. There's no place like home.
The mother-in-law said, relieved, as soon as she entered the house. But when the lights turned on, she noticed something was amiss. She quietly began to speak.
Wait, where is he?
He wasn't at your place either. Saying this, she called out for her husband multiple times. But there was no response, and the mother-in-law came up with an optimistic theory. He's probably mad because I went on the trip without consulting him. He must have gone on a solo trip out of anger. That's why you guys couldn't tell me, right? I was growing tired of her cheerful assumptions. And I wondered how she could come up with such ideas. At that point, an exasperated Bob responded.
Dad went on a long trip by himself.
See? When's he coming back? She asked Bob without a hint of doubt in her voice. I couldn't stay silent any longer and tried to steady myself before speaking.
He's not coming back.
What do you mean? Is he that mad? Realizing she still didn't grasp the situation, I led her to a specific room. As she entered, she stood in shock and disbelief.
Is this some kind of joke?
It's not a joke.
We've already held Dad's funeral.
The mother-in-law, now grasping the gravity of the situation, asked what had happened.
He was in a car accident.
I replied, tears forming in my eyes. At Bob's words, my mother-in-law began to recall and speak. There was that car accident. Remember? Catherine's dad was rushed to the hospital. And on that day, wasn't your father here too? After that, my dad woke up. He's still hospitalized, though. Hearing my words, my mother-in-law seemed lost and held her head, saying she didn't understand. I then explained what happened afterward. On the day my dad was taken to the hospital, my father-in-law accompanied him. I was by my unconscious father's side, taking care of him all the time. Concerned about my father and me, my father-in-law visited us daily. And a few days later, when my dad finally woke up, both my father-in-law and I were overjoyed. We had plans to go out for drinks once he was discharged. But then, on our way back, I tried to speak calmly, but I was overwhelmed with emotion and couldn't continue. Bob took over for me. Dad was apparently taken to the same hospital as Catherine's father. Catherine saw him being brought in by ambulance by chance and let me know. I rushed there immediately, but it was already too late.
Why did that happen?
My mother-in-law, taken aback by our story, seemed lost for words. However, a visibly distressed Bob quickly changed his demeanor and spoke up.
What were you doing all that time, Mom? I tried contacting you multiple times. I had no idea things had gotten this bad.
My mother-in-law looked baffled by Bob's questioning. Seeing her like this, Bob's expression remained unchanged. We get it. No one expected this to happen.
That's right, isn't it? We're all in the same boat, right?
But as my mother-in-law tried to reason, Bob stared her down.
Then tell me, why was your cell phone off?
What? I mean. Hearing Bob's words, the mother-in-law turned pale. Yet, undeterred by her reaction, Bob continued speaking.
I kept calling, but your phone was always off. And when I finally thought I got through, no answer. You didn't even call back. What's that about?
My mother-in-law was at a loss for words. And she stayed silent. But Bob wasn't finished.
Why didn't you tell us you were going on a trip in advance? Who are you planning to go with? At least tell us where you're headed. Sure, you're an adult and don't need to tell us everything, but we would have liked to know, especially given what happened.
Bob shared our feelings on the matter. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law responded. I went on a trip with a friend.
But as far as I know, I contacted all your friends. None of them were with you. They even said they didn't know where you went.
Bob kept pressing for answers. I've made new friends recently. Ones you don't know about. She seemed determined to counter Bob's accusations. But Bob wasn't backing down. Is this him? Bob asked, showing her a photo of a man walking arm in arm with my mother-in-law. Seeing the picture, her face went pale. He's just a drinking buddy. Not the one I traveled with. Bob replied with a meaningful tone.
Seems like you're quite close for just a drinking buddy.
There's nothing between us. Sure, we're close, but not in the way you're implying.
Why the act? You think we don't know? Even my dad knew.
Unable to hold back his frustration with his evasive mother, Bob finally raised his voice.
Do you still deny anything with him, even after seeing this?
Bob thrust another photo at her, showing the two of them entering a hotel. The sight made her shiver. Why do you have this? It seemed that my mother-in-law realized she couldn't deny it any longer and timidly asked.
I found a diary when I was going through Dad's belongings. It was inside.
Bob calmly began to explain. He told her about the diary and how it mentioned the person in the photograph. His dad had known for quite some time that his wife had been having an affair but never confronted her. In fact, the diary even mentioned that he felt he was the one to blame.
Dad's diary didn't blame you or say a single bad thing about you.
Bob said. I'm so sorry. I did go on a trip with him. I never thought it would lead to this. I'm truly sorry. She apologized with tears in her eyes after understanding the gravity of her actions. I'm sorry to both of you. Please forgive me. I won't ever see him again and I'll change my ways. The mother-in-law pleaded while crying. However, Bob replied firmly.
Even if Dad forgave you, I will never.
Hearing this, the mother-in-law collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Yet, we left her there and exited the house. Later, Bob told us about a local bar that was mentioned in his father's diary. He went there and discreetly asked around. Apparently, the mother-in-law hadn't been meeting with the man she traveled with. They had both been hiding the fact that they were married and decided to part ways without any arguments. However, neighbors and friends found out about her affair and the fact she skipped her husband's funeral for a romantic getaway. They shunned her, and this hurt led her to sell her house and move away. On my end, I still struggled to cope with my father-in-law's passing. But my spirits were lifted when my dad got discharged from the hospital. We reminisce about my father-in-law almost daily.
I'm gonna go out for a drink soon. I had promised Bob's dad we'd have a drink together after he got better, so I'll bring his photo along.
My dad said cheerfully. Please ensure you're fully healed before you go out. We don't want you sleeping just anywhere. Bob responded with concern.
Nah, I'm fine. I'm not gonna sleep just anywhere with Bob's dad's photo.
He chuckled, not taking my plea seriously. Yet, he looked genuinely happy. To be honest, I hadn't found much to smile about since my father-in-law passed away. But lately, I've found myself laughing a bit more. Probably due to these light-hearted conversations. There's another piece of joyous news too. I'm pregnant. And as I want my father-in-law to rest in peace, I aim to regain my happiness bit by bit. I can't remain sad forever, especially now that I have a child on the way.